Have you thought about moving this year? Because 56% of Americans have, and a lot of them are probably leaving the states on this list. Not necessarily because they're the worst, but you'll still probably want to avoid them anyways, as more people are leaving than moving to them. Thanks to the pandemic, many Americans have had their jobs and even social lives move online. Because of this, tons of city folk have decided to move to cheaper, less crowded places, which has turned them into some of the fastest growing states. We already made a video about those though, so check that out after watching this one if you haven't already. But if 40 states grew in 2020, that means 10 actually decreased in population. I mean, that's just basic math. And people really seem to be doing the math because living expenses are the #1 reason they're moving. Net outbound migration isn't the only cause of population decline, however, since natural decrease, aka when the total number of births minus deaths is negative, is also a factor. So we combined the two and found the top 10 fastest shrinking states for 2021. And let's hit 5,000 likes if you want to see a video on the fastest growing cities. Number 10. New Jersey. By pure net migration numbers, New Jersey was actually the most moved out of state in 2020, with 70% of total moves here being outbound migration. So how the heck did the population only decrease by 0.043% last year? Well, because there's also this thing called international immigration. Nearly 1 in 4 New Jerseyans are immigrants, and it makes sense that so many move here because there are tons of amazing job opportunities. But while New Jersey's median household income of $85,000 is the 3rd highest in the nation, the Garden State is also one of the most expensive. Between the extremely high state income tax, with the top bracket paying 10.75%, and the highest effective property tax rate of any state at 2.47%, New Jersey sure is driving out the rich, with nearly half of all outbound residents making over $150K a year. And although the median home value of $382,000 might not seem that bad, the highest population density in the US with 1,218 people per square mile is. To put that into perspective, only 8 states have population densities more than 290 people per square mile. It's no wonder New Jerseyans are moving to cheaper, warmer, and less crowded places, with the majority of them going to Florida and North or South Carolina. Number 9. Vermont. Unlike New Jersey, Vermont actually experienced the highest percentage of newcomers in 2020, with 76.6% of total moves in the state being inbound migration. But despite all the people moving here, Vermont still experienced a population loss of 0.06% last year. This is because most of the new residents are retirees and not having kids. Vermont's average age of 42.9 years is actually the 2nd highest in the nation, and 8 of the state's 14 counties experience a natural population decrease every year. But as more individuals are able to work online, I'm sure people of all ages will start moving here, as Vermont has great schools, virtually no crime, incredible healthcare, and one of the highest qualities of life. Not to mention, you get so much beautiful, lush green nature surrounded by mountains and lakes all to yourself, since the Green Mountain State also has one of the lowest population densities at just 67 residents per square mile. Number 8. Mississippi. Wow, even though Mississippi is the poorest and worst state in the country, it's only the 8th fastest shrinking. But maybe this is because people can't afford to leave even if they wanted to, since there are literally no good paying jobs with a median household income of just $45,700 and a poverty rate of 19.6%. So how fitting that 71% of residents who were able to flee the state last year said they did so for a job. But outbound migration wasn't the only reason for the annual population decline of 0.163%. Mississippi has the highest obesity rate of any state at 40.8%, the 5th highest number of smokers with 20.5% of residents lighting up regularly, and the absolute worst healthcare outcomes in the US. As I'm sure you can guess, that isn't a great combination and has led to the lowest life expectancy in the nation at just 74.6 years. Combine this with the 2nd highest rate of premature babies due to high teen pregnancy rates, and Mississippi actually had a slight natural population decrease in 2020 as well. Number 7. Connecticut. Most Northeasterners only put up with the cold weather and high cost of living for the jobs, but now, since they can work online, nothing is holding them back from moving somewhere cheaper and warmer. And Connecticut is the prime example, as it was the fourth most moved out of state in 2020, with 63.5% of moves being outbound migration. But while more Connecticut residents moved to Florida than any other state last year, not everyone moving out is trying to retire or ditch the high taxes and expensive cost of living. New York, California, and Massachusetts were 3 of the 5 most popular states that Connecticuters moved to, and they all have higher taxes and costs of living. But you know what else they have? Better jobs. Sure, some parts of Connecticut are incredibly wealthy, such as Stamford, but others are really struggling as there's a huge division of wealth in the state. Hartford, for example, has a poverty rate of 28.1%, despite the median home value being just $124,000. Overall, Connecticut's population decreased by 0.173% in 2020, and it's been the 3rd fastest shrinking state since 2010. Number 6, Louisiana. Louisiana has been steadily losing population over the past 5 years, mainly due to the slowdown in the oil and gas industries, which the state's economy heavily relies on. And since the only other jobs in the state are low-wage tourism and service industry jobs, it makes sense that 73% of people leaving did so for a job. But actually, only 52.7% of total moves in the state last year were outbound migration. The population still decreased by 0.233%, however, because Louisiana has the 2nd worst healthcare system, 3rd highest smoking rate, 7th highest obesity rate, and the 5th shortest life expectancy, with heart disease and cancer accounting for nearly 90% of deaths statewide. This, combined with the growing number of aging residents who are no longer having kids, has resulted in Louisiana's natural increase being almost a net zero now, so it doesn't offset outbound migration like it has in the past. I do have to say, though, it's bizarre to me that Mississippi, of all places, aka the only state worse than Louisiana to live in, is the 2nd most popular state Louisianans are moving to. Number 5, Hawaii. Hawaii's an interesting one because sure, the expensive cost of living and wages that don't keep up were a factor in the 0.333% population decline last year, but it's also a little more complicated than that. Many mainlanders who visit the islands on vacation love and romanticize the place, but very few ever end up actually moving to the Aloha state due to the expensive and difficult process of shipping everything over, and even fewer are able to embrace the Aloha way of life. So whether it be from island fever, isolation from family, or an inability to adjust to the culture, the vast majority of new residents move back within 2 years. This, combined with a large military population that frequently sees families come and go, and many locals being priced out of their homes due to Hawaii being by far the most expensive state, led to 14,000 more Hawaii residents moving to the mainland in 2020 than mainlanders moving to Hawaii. Number 4, New York. Thanks to being one of only 6 states to have continuously shrunk since 2010, and Florida's explosion of growth over the past decade, New York is actually no longer the 3rd largest state by population. But it did have the 2nd highest percentage of outbound migration in 2020, with 67% of total moves exiting the state. Given all that occurred last year, it makes sense that 63% of the net 80,000 people who left New York in 2020 were from New York City. I mean, who the heck wanted to be cooped up in a 300 square foot apartment for months while most of the city was still closed? But New Yorkers didn't just move due to the pandemic. The expensive cost of living and high taxes are the main reasons people have been fleeing New York City, and the harsh winters and poor job opportunities upstate are why New Yorkers are leaving the rest of the state. Now, New York also did see a large amount of international immigration last year, but the population still decreased by 0.393%. Number 3, Illinois. While you might think New York has terrible taxes, Illinois actually has the highest effective median total tax rate at over 15%, and the effective property tax rate of 2.16% is the 2nd highest. So it should come as no surprise that nearly half of Illinoisans have thought about moving out, and that high taxes were their number 1 reason. Better housing and employment opportunities in other states were also major factors, as was the weather, considering the top 6 states Illinois Illinoisans are moving to, Florida, Texas, California, Arizona, Washington, and North Carolina all have much warmer winters. Now, as a whole, Illinois is actually pretty average in most statistical categories, but many Illinoisans still hate living here, as over 25% of them in a recent Gallup poll claimed their state to be the worst, which is probably why it's been the second fastest shrinking state since 2010. Illinois' net population loss in 2020 was 0.403%, and it had the third highest percentage of outbound migration, with 66.4% of total moves leaving the state. Number 2. Alaska. You may or may not be surprised with this one, considering Alaska is the most rural state in the nation with a population density of just 1.27 people per square mile. But while there's been a huge migration of Americans leaving cities and moving to less crowded places, the last frontier might just be a bit too rural, not to mention cold. In fact, it's such an undesirable place to live that Alaska couldn't even pay people to move here. No, like seriously, they pay you to live here, and still 9,000 more people moved out than in last year. Alaska's population peaked in 2016 at over 740,000 residents, mainly due to the booming oil industry. But ever since demand and oil prices went down, the population has been plummeting, which, combined with the large transient military population, led to a net population loss of 0.49% in 2020. Sure, the nature is beautiful, but for most, the frigid and dark winters, high cost of living, and isolation from the rest of the country just aren't worth it. Now, before we get to number 1, make sure you leave a like and subscribe. And I also wanted to give a quick honorable mention to California, which you probably expected to be high on this list, considering so many Californians are leaving and invading pretty much every other state. So you might be surprised to learn that while it isn't growing at the rate it used to, the Golden State still had a net population gain of 0.127% in 2020. Now, technically, more U.S. residents did move out of the state than in, with around 58% of total moves being outbound migration. But fun fact, California's population has actually never shrunk. So yeah, while there has been a mass exodus of California domestically for the past few years, international immigration and natural increase have more than made up for it. Number 1. West Virginia. West Virginia's economy literally depends on the coal mining industry. And since U.S. reliance on coal has shrunk drastically, the mountain state continues to slip into disarray with no help in sight. There are virtually no good jobs here, resulting in the second lowest median household income of just $48,800 and a poverty rate of 16%. Because of this, those who can afford to have been fleeing the state for years, making it the fastest shrinking state since 2010. But only 59% of the population loss was actually due to net migration out of the state. The other 41% was due to natural decrease, as most younger West Virginians who can still have children are fleeing, leaving the state with an increasingly aging population that also has the second lowest life expectancy. Overall, West Virginia's population decreased by 0.673% last year and will be by far the fastest shrinking state of 2021.